So that means a worker in our county needs to earn almost $42 per hour, which is almost triple the minimum wage in our city, to afford the average monthly rent of over $2,000. So some people, especially if they're lower acuity, can wait a very long time to get matched to housing. And in fact, they may never get matched to housing through this system. In Los Angeles County, on any given day, we have about 207 people who exit homelessness and go back into housing. And we have 227 people become homeless. And if you caught those numbers, what that means is we actually have an ever increasing number of people becoming homeless in our county. That almost 25,000 people, or about 36% of our homeless population, are experiencing chronic homelessness, which means they've been homeless for an extended period of time and have a complex health or behavioral health condition. That's almost 9,000 more people than we had in 2019. What this means is we have a growing group of people who are experiencing long-term homelessness. Yeah, my name is Cheri Todoroff, and I am the executive director of the Homeless Initiative in Los Angeles County. And I have been working in homelessness for a number of years now. We are a developed country with a lot of resources. We should not have people experiencing homelessness on our streets. I consider it a crisis, and I consider it a humanitarian crisis.
The data have shown that California has one of the worst homelessness problems in the country. And also in the past 10 years, we had the biggest increase. And you know this better than me. So I would like to really ask you, maybe to start with, like, what factors do you think have contributed to the rising homelessness and the falling housing supply in California?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons. It's a really, really complex issue. We have stagnant income, we have rising housing prices, lack of tenant protections, a history of discriminatory land use, and also the need for more services to support people, and particularly mental health and substance use services. Here in Los Angeles County, we have a shortage of over 500,000 affordable housing units, and the median home income price is almost $800,000. So that means a worker in our county needs to earn almost $42 per hour, which is almost triple the minimum wage in our city, to afford the average monthly rent of over $2,000 in this county. In addition to that, we have the overlay of many, many decades of systemic racism. So we have Black people in our county experiencing homelessness 4 times more than they are represented in the general population.
So you mentioned something about mental health and possibly also drug addiction. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we do have people experiencing homelessness who are dealing with mental health and substance use issues, although that's not the majority of people experiencing homelessness. And sometimes we jump to assumptions about that, and it's really important to understand that that's not the case. Most people experiencing homelessness are for economic reasons. However, access to those mental health and substance use services are really essential in terms of helping to prevent people from falling into homelessness, and also once people are homeless, to help them recover, get connected to services, and get back into housing quickly. And right now, we often have wait times for those services, so they're not available when people need them.
Do you know how long the wait time would be for those services?
It does vary. Often, like if you need outpatient services, those are more readily available. The longer wait times are when it comes to like residential or inpatient services. And so somebody who needs a residential treatment program for substance use or for mental health services could wait weeks or could wait months. Unfortunately, those are not available on demand.
I see. And I think one thing that's very important is to make sure they take proper medication on time. And I just worried about if we leave homeless individuals who have mental illness on the street, and I don't know whether they would be able to do so.
No, you're absolutely right. It is definitely a challenge for people experiencing mental health issues to be compliant with a treatment regimen while they're on the streets. That is medication. You have to be able to acquire it, purchase it. You have to be able to store it. You may have to have access, like some medication you need to take with food. There's a number of things that make taking medication and sticking to treatment plans really, really complicated when you're unsheltered. That is actually one of the reasons why we want to bring people inside as quickly as possible. The longer you remain unsheltered, the more complex those health and behavioral health conditions become.
For people with severe and chronic mental illness, usually the first recommendation is for them to get permanent supportive housing, right? And because it has the wraparound services and it's more with no time limit. So for someone who cannot get permanent supportive housing right away, do we have other solutions for them?
Yeah, unfortunately, the shortage of affordable housing, which is so vast, largely impacts our ability to help people exit homelessness. And so we do have many clients that we work with. They actually have been issued a rental subsidy, for example, like a Section 8 subsidy, and they're not able to lease up because there's not enough units out there to actually lease up due to that affordable housing shortage. And so that does impact anybody experiencing homelessness, in addition to people with mental illness experiencing homelessness, being able to get back into that housing quickly. And so there are some things that do happen to support people while they continue to be unhoused. And that includes outreach teams who are supporting clients on the street. And we have outreach teams with health professionals, mental health professionals, substance use counselors, peer counselors who go out on the street and engage people there, as well as clinical mental health services and psychiatries that also serve people while they're on the street. But obviously that's not ideal. We want people to come inside as quickly as possible. So our goal, if somebody's not able to move directly into permanent supportive housing, is to assist them into interim housing or shelter. And we do have a whole range of shelter settings, from basic shelter for a client who really just needs food and a bed until they get back on their feet, to shelter with a high level of clinical services and case management support that can really help those higher acuity clients who really need more assistance with behavioral health or a physical health condition.
So do you know why sometimes people would prefer the street to shelters?
Yeah, so typically what we do find when you have the outreach workers who are out there engaging clients, many of them want to come inside. And they want to come inside as quickly as possible. Sometimes we say that there's this theme that people are service resistant. That's usually not the case. What has happened is people who are unsheltered, there may be a lot of trauma in their history. They may have had bad experiences working with mainstream systems. They may have had contact with the law enforcement and criminal justice system that was very traumatic for them. And it takes a while sometimes to build trust with some clients. And typically once you have that trust, people are really willing to accept whatever services are offered to them. And they absolutely want to come inside as quickly as possible. A lot of our shelter settings are sort of large congregate shelters where you have a lot of people in a room with beds. It can sometimes be noisy in there. It could be disruptive. You're not always allowed to have pets, although more and more shelters are trying to accommodate that. Sometimes you're not always allowed to bring all of your possessions inside. There are reasons why for some clients, they feel more comfortable staying outside because they're able to have more sort of control over their environment and have the things around them that are important to them. But I would say that as soon as you're able to offer somebody a shelter setting that's a good fit for them, for example, what we call a non-congregate shelter, like a room of their own, almost everybody says yes very quickly to coming inside.
Do you know what percentage of your shelters are the single room shelters and what percentage are the shared space shelters?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of shelters are those shared spaces. And that has a lot to do with just being able to, you're competing here with trying to serve as many people as possible. And shared spaces do that with trying to create more comfortable spaces for clients. And in that scenario, you would have fewer clients being served. And so we have a whole mix of those in our shelter system. And we've actually recently during the pandemic, and especially with some state and federal supports, have been able to create some more non-congregate spaces for clients. So for example, that would be the state Project Room Key program, which was a leasing up of hotels and motels across the state, including in Los Angeles County, for people at high risk of COVID, as well as the Project Home Key program, which is allowing acquisition actually of properties for both interim housing and permanent housing. And most of those properties are these non-congregate settings.
the project Home Key is converting motel rooms into homelessness unit. And then that's just great to hear. Do you know how many units of those motel rooms are available roughly, like maybe in your county or maybe in California? I mean, if you don't know the number, that's okay.
Yeah, so in Los Angeles County, both the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles have had programs. So speaking on behalf of the county of Los Angeles, through the first round of Project Home Key, which has allowed the acquisition of properties for permanent housing, we were able to acquire 850 units. The state has released their solicitation for the second round of Home Key funding, with the first round of applications due at the end of January. And through that process, we plan to apply again and are hoping to be able to secure around 1,000 more units in that round of funding.
Oh, that's really great. So during that process, because you said this is an application process, so my guess is your office need to submit an application to the state. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's correct. So for the Home Key funding opportunity, cities and counties are able, and tribes as well, are able to submit applications to the state to seek funding to purchase properties that can be used for housing.
I see. What kind of difficulties or challenges do you encounter when you try to, say, acquire motel units from businesses?
Yeah, and so obviously the high cost of real estate, right? And so it's just so expensive. We're trying to get the greatest number of units that we can for the funding that will be available, but we also want them to be high quality units. We want them to be spaces that people are going to feel like are their home and that they're going to be happy living in. And so we also have to think about not just the unit, but the community that it's in. Is it next to transit lines? Is it near grocery stores and healthcare facilities? Are they near schools and libraries? And so we're thinking about a lot of different things as we're looking at what the best properties are. And, you know, unfortunately, just the cost of real estate is really the biggest challenge, not only as it relates to the Home Key program, but just as it relates to housing in general and the development of new housing.
Roughly, I mean, this is just me being curious, like roughly how much does it cost to say buy a motel room?
Yeah, so I think it varies widely. We were able to do that, and the state had some limits on the amount that they would contribute per room in Home Key in round 1 and round 2, and those limits are greater in round 2. In the round 1 of the Home Key, we were acquiring properties at, you know, around $200,000 or so per door. And that was great, but we've also had to do a lot of renovation in those properties, right? They needed a lot of upgrades and the installation of like kitchens, for example, in order to make them viable for permanent housing. And so that has led to increased time with being able to actually move people into those units. So we're hopeful with Home Key round 2 that we will be able to acquire properties that may have some of those amenities already built in, and maybe newer properties that don't need as much renovation. So we'll be able to move people in more quickly.
Well, that's really good to hear. So actually 200,000 is not, it's actually less than I think. Do you know like how much it would cost to renovate the second? I mean, because you said like you have to buy it and then you have to renovate it.
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately when you're looking at the renovation cost, that does significantly increase the cost per unit. So that could add another $100,000 or even more per unit. And so we are looking at with Home Key to be able to spend more per unit, but to have units that are more move-in ready.
So for those move-in ready, like how much do you have to pay ultimately?
So we're hoping to, I know, it's a good question. So for the move-in ready units at acquisition, we're hoping to pay closer in the $300,000 to $400,000 range per door. So these would be units that would be permanent housing. They would, they're all going to be studios essentially, right? Because we're converting hotels and motels. And they will be smaller units as well as studios, but they will be, they'll have a living area, they'll have their own bathrooms, they'll have kitchenettes. We will be seeking to have common spaces in the property for the residents to come together. Also spaces for service providers to be on site, to be able to support the clients in their housing, and also outdoor space as well, which is like so important for well-being.
Yeah, definitely. I read that, this is not related to homelessness, but if like a community has more trees, even if it's fake trees, that increase people's happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're realizing from our lessons learned, right, with our first round of Home Key, that some of the properties we're using to serve families. And so it was essential to build in, like, for example, playground equipment. And to have the outdoor areas for pets as well. And so, like, our goal here with these properties is to make them properties that are really home-like and high quality and just really appealing and healing and healthful for the people who live in them.
I don't know how these units are assigned. Like, how would you make decisions? Because you only have a few hundred units available, but you have like thousands of homeless individuals on the street. How would you make that decision?
So we have a system for prioritizing people experiencing homelessness for the housing that we have in LA County. And actually this happens across the state and in much of the country as well. It is called our coordinated entry system. And that is a system in which our homeless services providers engage people experiencing homelessness and do an assessment essentially of their vulnerability and also what their housing needs are. And then what happens is we're able to use the result of that assessment to basically come up with a score and to be able to match people to the most appropriate housing for them. So for people who need permanent supportive housing, and those are the people who have experienced the longest periods of homelessness, who may have disabilities, who have chronic and complex health and behavioral health conditions. We want to match the most acute person, the most vulnerable person to the housing first. So we use that coordinated entry system to help us identify who those people are. And then they would be the first people moved into permanent supportive housing.
Is it true that every homeless individuals on the street would receive this score?
So we do have a goal actually to have everybody experiencing homelessness in the coordinated entry system. And that is a way for us to be able to match them to housing as soon as there's housing to match them to. Unfortunately, the situation is that there are way more people who need housing than we have housing units or rental subsidies to match them to. So some people, especially if they're lower acuity, can wait a very long time to get matched to housing. And in fact, they may never get matched to housing through the system. They may need to self-resolve in other ways. That could be through family reunification, for making arrangements with family or friends to basically sleep on the extra couch or in the extra bedroom. Or also many people, they may have fallen into homelessness because of an economic crisis. And some people, and especially if they're able to resolve that crisis quickly, can get back into housing and get income again and can make their own way out of homelessness. In Los Angeles County, on any given day, we have about 207 people who exit homelessness and go back into housing. And we have 227 people become homeless. And if you caught those numbers, what that means is we actually have an ever increasing number of people becoming homeless in our county. It's not until we're able to have that first engagement with those clients that we're able to start talking to them about getting connected to resources, getting connected to shelter and permanent housing, and to do that assessment to get them into the coordinated entry system. And then there are some clients who just need a little bit more time and a little bit more engagement before they work with an outreach worker or a service provider in order to complete that assessment.
It's really hard, right? I can't imagine myself doing it because, people move around, and how can you keep track of them? And they may not have a cell phone, and they may not, their tent may not be in the same location the second day when you go find them.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's one of the complexities of being able to serve people experiencing homelessness is that they are homeless, right? So there's not a fixed address. And they could be moving in different spaces. And I do have to say that there's an amazing group of outreach workers. I have so much respect for the outreach workers who are out on the front line who are directly engaging clients. They are so compassionate and they are fighting for those clients every single day. And they do a really good job of staying up and keeping track of the clients that they're working with. But it is a challenge for them on every single day.
My friend who is a researcher in this space said about like 20%, is it 20% or 15%? But it was a substantial proportion of people who have already received permanent supportive housing ended up exiting and go back to the street. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as it relates to permanent supportive housing here in Los Angeles County, one of the things that we started deeply investing in around 2014 was doing really intensive wraparound services around clients who are going into permanent supportive housing. What historically, there's not been a funding stream to support that. And so all of our homeless services providers, they had to like cobble together like one-time grants or short-term funding or other solutions in order to be able to provide services for people who go into permanent supportive housing. And often those were not sustainable. And so the services were not ongoing over a long period of time. And when you have clients who are really dealing with complex health and behavioral health conditions, they're going to need that ongoing support to help with staying stable in housing. And so when we started investing and funding directly those wraparound services, we did see a big change. We fund case management services here for every client who goes into permanent supportive housing. And that is one case manager who is serving 20 clients. And that service is indefinite. It can stay with a client forever. And if the client is living in what we call project-based housing, and so in an apartment complex where there's a lot of people who have exited homelessness who are now living there, those case managers are on site to serve those clients. If the client is like living out in an apartment they leased up in the community, the case manager will go with them. And so what we have seen is housing retention rates that are closer to 90 to 95% for people who are getting that level of support.
I see. So this new policy of giving more caseworkers and a closer tracking system. So in that case, then you will increase your retention.
Absolutely. So providing more supportive services to clients as they go into housing and having those services be ongoing definitely increases retention rates.
So when was this policy enacted? That you have more wraparound services?
Yeah, so we started doing it in 2014, and that was through the LA County Department of Health Services through the Housing for Health program, where the health department there started creating a permanent supportive housing program for its patients who are homeless, who were cycling in and out of the emergency room because they would come in with some type of health crisis, and the emergency room doctor was able to fix that immediate crisis. But when you exit to the street, that person is not able to, they're not able to necessarily be in the best environment to help to heal and become healthy again. And so they would show back up in the emergency room again. And so the health department said, this is a tragedy. Like, this is a tragedy for these people. It's also not good for the healthcare system because we have people coming through it who are not really helping. And so the health department decided we're going to create our own permanent supportive housing program to help our really vulnerable patients who are coming through our hospital. And they funded both the rental subsidies and they funded what we call intensive case management services. And very quickly saw the impact that this was having on these clients as they moved into housing, and how that really extended the tenancy, and that really improved the outcomes for the client. And as we saw this happen in Los Angeles County, we used it actually as the model to expand once our voters in the county approved Measure H, which is a quarter-cent sales tax to fund services for people experiencing homelessness. With those Measure H dollars, we took what started in the health department and we started to fund those intensive case management services for every permanent supportive housing placement in the county.
Are there any new policies or initiatives in the space of homelessness that your office and yourself are taking pride?
Yeah, I would say one of the great successes here in Los Angeles County actually is the Homeless Initiative. That was approved by our Board of Supervisors in 2015. It created an office which was responsible for directing, overseeing, and evaluating all of our ongoing efforts to expand and enhance services for people experiencing homelessness. And then linked to that in 2017, our voters approved Measure H, which is a quarter-cent sales tax to fund homeless services. And so with those efforts, we have seen a dramatic increase in homeless services. And that includes serving 75,000 more people have moved into permanent housing, and we served over 100,000 people in our shelter system. Unfortunately, despite these investments, we continue to see increases in the number of people experiencing homelessness. So in LA County, on any given day, we have 207 people who exit homelessness and are rehoused, but we have 227 people fall into homelessness. And that's because the inflow into homelessness is so great and because prevention is so challenging. The issue of preventing people from falling into homelessness is like an area where we need to really redouble our efforts. It involves major societal and systematic changes in access to education, living wage jobs, affordable housing, healthcare, and addressing systemic racism. These are things that are so downstream that sort of start at birth, but that's where prevention starts. And that's where we really need to refocus efforts, because we are not going to be able to impact homelessness until we stop people from falling into homelessness.
Definitely. So you said 207 who exit and then 227 who became new homeless individuals. So then every day you have a net growth of 20. So 20 per day, right? You have the new people. So do you know whether they are from out of LA, or they're from in LA? Maybe they were evicted. Who are they?
Yeah, and so the majority of people who are falling into homelessness actually were housed in Los Angeles before becoming homeless. So 80% of our unsheltered residents have been here for more than 5 years. When we look at who's experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County, we have over 66,000 people experiencing homelessness. That was from our 2020 homeless count. That was a 12% increase from the prior year. We were not able to do a homeless count in 2021 due to the pandemic, but we will be doing a homeless count in January of 2022. I think one of the statistics that is especially concerning to me is that almost 25,000 people, or about 36% of our homeless population, are experiencing chronic homelessness, which means they've been homeless for an extended period of time and have a complex health or behavioral health condition. That's almost 9,000 more people than we had in 2019. What this means is we have a growing group of people who are experiencing long-term homelessness. And that means that typically those people are also going to be experiencing an increasing number of health and behavioral health challenges as well, because it's very, very hard to be homeless. And the longer you're homeless, the more health impacts it's going to have. And the more challenging it's going to be to help get somebody rehoused. If we have a very low housing vacancy rate, which we had for a number of years in LA County, so like 2 or 3%. So there were not that many units on the market in order for people to be able to move into. And then during the pandemic, those numbers, we're going to see what the true impact has been. But with the eviction moratoriums and with people not moving as much, we're also seeing that the vacancy rates seem to be remaining very low. And so what that means is it just takes a lot longer to lease an apartment. And we have, on any given day, we actually have thousands of people who are homeless in our county who actually have been matched to a rental subsidy. So they may have a Section 8 voucher, but they have not been able to find a unit to lease up yet. And when it takes 6 months or 12 months to lease up a unit, that means you're going to have people experiencing homelessness fall into that chronically homeless status just because there's not a unit to lease up.
I think that's really interesting that you pointed out. So I would also, maybe this is just my speculation, add to the point of low housing stock. So would you think, so if someone already have a Section 8 voucher, do you think maybe the landlords are reluctant to rent it to them, and maybe that also played a role?
Yeah, so there's historically been some reluctance among some landlords to rent to people with a Section 8 voucher. However, we've been doing a lot of work on that in Los Angeles County. And so there's actually, landlords are not able to discriminate based on the source of income for rent. And so it's legally not allowed. But there are other challenges leasing up to people experiencing homelessness. And that may be they don't have the best credit history, or they don't have the best rental history, or maybe there was contact, with the criminal justice system. There's like a variety of reasons when you start doing background checks, why it may be more less likely that a landlord is going to rent to somebody experiencing homelessness. So to address that, we've done a lot of landlord outreach. And so what that means is we have a landlord incentive program that helps with any like damage mitigation that a landlord may experience with a tenant. It also assists with like move-in assistance to make sure that the unit is going to meet the housing quality standards that are required for a Section 8 unit. And so that may help the landlord with some sort of improvements, tenant improvements to their unit, make sure that there are appliances in there, which is certainly benefits for the landlord. And then there's also basically sort of like sign-up bonuses for landlords as well, that if they're willing to lease to somebody with Section 8, they get a bonus when that lease up happens. On top of that, we really want to support the landlords as well. And so when we're talking to them about participating in this program, we make sure that they know that all of the clients that are coming in will be supported with case managers. There will be wraparound services. The goal is housing stability. And we talk about the success that we have with housing stability and retention as well. So that landlords understand that that they're going to be able to have sort of long-term support, but also a long-term stable tenant in their building.
I guess like Section 8 vouchers, those are, you can receive them permanently, right? Is it permanent or is there?
Yeah, so Section 8 vouchers are essentially permanent, although there is an income sort of like re-verification and qualification process that happens annually.
I see. What about, so Section 8 vouchers, those are not the biggest housing assistance to homeless population, as far as I know. So the other one is rapid rehousing, which is like, you get a partial reimbursement. So for that kind, if you're, if you're negotiating with a landlord, and the landlord might be worried after the housing assistance ends, will my tenants continue to pay the rent? And if they don't pay the rent, am I allowed to evict them? So what about that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the rapid rehousing program serves people who largely just need some economic support to get back into housing again. So there may have been like a crisis with a job or healthcare or something that happened that led to them losing their housing. And with sort of like time-limited rental subsidy support and with case management support, they're able to get back into housing. And then over time, they're able to take over their own rent again. And so in that scenario, the rapid rehousing program supports the client with their rent for a period of time and does all that case management support with them to help them increase their income so that they can take over their rent. Typically, that involves getting back into the job market. Sometimes that involves getting clients connected to the benefits for which they're eligible, like SSI, which provides income to clients with disabilities. And then the client holds a lease with the landlord, so it is between the two of them. And the goal here, typically, the clients stay in that rapid rehousing program until they have that stability to be able to pay their rent, because everybody wants this to be a success. We want the client to stay housed. We want the landlord to want to continue to participate in the program. However, once the client does sort of like officially exit the rapid rehousing program, but they're still in their housing, they're paying their own rent. If there is any issue with paying that rent, they're able to come back in and get some supports for that as well. So we have sort of like short-term financial assistance or shallow subsidy that could be available to the client if they need that in order to be able to pay their rent. And then also on the landlord side, they have all of the rights that they would typically have. And so if there is an issue and if eviction is warranted, our goal would be to prevent that, or would be to help to move the client to another setting so we can avoid the eviction. But if an eviction is warranted, then the landlord is able to pursue that.
Can you help me understand, which department in the county is in charge of what?
Yeah, and so that's where it does get really complicated, right? So in Los Angeles County, we have 88 cities. And those cities range from being small to being very large, like the city of Los Angeles. So they have different types of structures and departments within their cities that address different aspects of homelessness. For many of the cities, it's actually about like the housing and the land use piece of it. And that's where they're able to have the most impact by supporting the development of affordable and permanent supportive housing within their city boundaries, by creating land use opportunities that support those developments, by working with landlords in their communities to encourage them to rent to people with vouchers. Like, there's a lot of ways in which cities, especially on the housing side, are able to make a great impact. The county in Los Angeles plays a large role in providing services. So we have all of our core departments, which have long served people experiencing homelessness. So we have our Department of Health Services, which provides healthcare, our Department of Mental Health, which provides mental health services, our Department of Public Health, which has a whole range of services, including providing substance use treatment services. So those are a role of county departments as it relates to providing services to people. We have other county departments such as Public Works and Regional Planning, which are also involved in all of that planning as it relates to housing and land use and development. We have our LA County Development Authority, which is the entity that sort of manages our federal voucher program at the county level, and also does funding opportunities to develop permanent supportive housing. In LA County, we also have the Homeless Initiatives. That was created by our Board of Supervisors. The board wanted to have a general oversight body for homelessness across the county. So we created the Homeless Initiative within the county to do that work. And the Homeless Initiative is the entity that is overseeing the use of those Measure H dollars that are used to provide services. And although the Homelessness Initiative does not provide services directly, we get them out to the county departments who directly interact with clients. And then we also get those dollars out to our Homeless Services Authority, which is called LAHSA, or the LA Homeless Services Authority, which is the continuum of care here in Los Angeles County. And it is through those county departments and through LAHSA that they are contracting directly with nonprofit homeless services providers. So those clients who are on the front line, those staff who are on the front line, who are engaging clients experiencing homelessness, who are doing the outreach work, who are running the shelters, who are providing all of those case management services for clients in permanent supportive housing.
What about like the, say, not related to homeless, maybe like a development of a low income housing, like a new building apartment. So would that be under your jurisdiction, or maybe under some other department in the county?
Yeah, so that falls under different jurisdictions. So there's the part of it that just has to do with, like, permitting and approvals and all of that. And that happens through different cities, like whatever municipality is responsible for this, basically the land where that building is going to be developed. There are different, both the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles have departments that fund the development of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. So what they will do is they will periodically run a solicitation, announce the availability of that funding, and then give the opportunities for developers to come in and to compete for that funding, in which they're able to come in with whatever project that they have, and for both affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, and seek funding. And that funding that they're getting from the county or the city would be part of the funding package or the lending stack that they would need in order to fully complete all the funding that they need in order to do that. So then they would then go on to compete for other dollars to sort of like help build that out. That's actually one of the things that makes the development of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing a bit more complex, is you're getting funding from sort of mainstream, like, banks. You're also getting funding from like a local jurisdiction. You're getting state funding. You have to put that whole package together. And that's a piece that does take some time. Certainly if there were like a way to really streamline that and fund the development of housing in a more sort of like no wrong door, one-stop shop type of approach, I think we would be able to shorten the amount of time that it does take to build some of the housing.
So is there any way or any like initiatives in the government that's going to speed up that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just need to have more efficient ways of funding the development of housing. We need to reduce the challenges associated with getting approvals and permitting and all of that. We need to have communities actually support the development of housing in their communities. That's actually one of the issues that sometimes can delay the development of housing and sometimes even stop it, right? When there is pushback from the community about that being cited in their community. So we definitely need to do a lot more work with communities across the city, across the county, to talk more about the impact of creating affordable housing in their community, how that will allow the residents who are homeless in their community to come inside, how it contributes to the overall health of a community, and really sort of talk through and respond to some of the fears that people have about, locating an apartment complex, in their neighborhood that may be serving people who are exiting homelessness. I think a lot of those fears exist because not everybody knows the level of support that goes into that building, the level of support that goes into supporting those clients, the on-site services that are available, and really that these properties are often really, really stable properties. Like you're often going to have like less turnover than you may have in a sort of a mainstream apartment complex.
This is not under your jurisdiction, but wouldn't you wish they are doing it a little faster so that can make your job easier?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody who works in this field would like to see housing development happen quicker, and at not only for any single property that's being developed, but also just the overall pace and number of properties that are being developed. We know that across our county, I mentioned that we are short 500,000 affordable housing units. Like we need that many more units for our current residents to be able to afford housing in this county. That is an issue across the state. It's an issue in many parts of the country. The pace of housing development has not kept up with the need for people for housing. And so there's absolutely no question that we need to do it faster. We need to do it better. We need to do it more.
Seems like this is more prevalent, a bigger problem in California than say on the East Coast, when Pennsylvania or like Indiana or other Midwest states. So is there anything unique about California that's slowing the housing development down?
I think, a part of it is just that California is one of the places in the country that's more expensive, right? And so it costs more to build a unit, which means that you can ultimately build fewer units with the dollars that you have. And so, that's very hard to overcome. That's an issue. If any of us who have tried to do anything from the most minor sort of like home improvement activity to actually some more major renovation, everybody experiences sticker shock in California when you're trying to do any type of renovation or any type of construction. So this is an issue that is not at all unique to development of permanent supportive housing or affordable housing. So I think there is just the overall cost associated with housing development in California, which has impacted ultimately the number of units that can be built.
What about, I totally agree with that, because, when you have the high cost to pay, you have to take out more loans, and then that can take a long time. But what about just the permitting process, just getting deal with the government? Like, is there anything special about California in that? Like, why is it slower here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm just going to have to say that, like, I haven't been involved in like the details of the different components of permitting and approvals. And so I'm not going to be your best expert on that particular piece of it. I know, like, I can know that I can see that like so many jurisdictions, including the city of county and LA, have been trying to like accelerate, to reduce the timelines. There's ongoing effort all of the time. However, ultimately, I think we can all collectively agree that it's taking too long.
So like, you have already cited that the vacancy rate is low in LA area, and we all know that, right? But also like someone online said, oh, look at, we have this abandoned building right there, nobody's using it, or there or here. So could we like put in some energy and then convert those abandoned buildings into permanent supportive housing?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of opportunity to take existing structures and to create, interim housing and permanent supportive housing. I think, there's a high level of interest in doing that as well. A challenge is actually the financing of that, right? And so right now we're using like all of the dollars that we have to construct housing. And so we actually need deeper investments. Like we need deeper partnership at the state and federal level to be able to invest more in the creation of affordable housing, to renovate buildings that already exist. In addition to those capital investments, we also need that operating subsidy piece as well. And that is something like, most people don't know that only 25% of people who are eligible for Section 8 in this country get it, 25%. And that means that there are many, many people who have such a low income who would be eligible for Section 8 if the program were fully resourced, but it's not. In LA County, it's more like only 1 of 10 people who's eligible for Section 8 ever gets it. So what that means is we have so many people who are so low income, who are always going to be severely rent burdened, who don't have access to a rental subsidy. And these buildings need operating subsidies in order to survive, right? If we build them, there's still going to be cost associated with maintaining that building, with the security for that building, with the front desk for that building, with the landscaping, with routine maintenance. Like all of those things have ongoing cost associated with them. When you're able to put Section 8 or a federal voucher into that building, then that is a way of covering those costs. It makes the housing affordable, but it also makes us able to operate the building because we have the revenue coming into it that allows it to operate. And so we need both the investments in the capital side, and we need the investments on the operating subsidy side in order to be able to scale this up further. Right now, we are doing everything to the maximum amount of the resources that we have. We just need more resources.
Governor Newsom signed a package of bills that's going to address the homelessness issue in California. And it had, I think it was about $22 billion, right? So you just mentioned the shortage of funding and resources. So how do you think that $22 billion is going to help your county and others?
Yeah, so the state's investment in homelessness is going to be very impactful. The resources that it's going to bring in will allow us to serve more people and provide more services. One of the things that we need to work further on is an ongoing source of funding. So many of the investments that are happening right now are one-time dollars. And with one-time dollars, you may be able to do something like purchase a building or renovate a building. And that is something that we're doing with the state dollars, like, for example, with the Home Key program. But that does not give you the ongoing funding that you're going to need to operate that building or to pay for the services for the clients who are going to be housed in that building. So we definitely need to continue to work with our state and federal partners to have ongoing funding so that the homeless services system can scale up and do these permanent housing investments and know that there's going to be a way to operate them for years to come. And that's very hard to do when you're getting one-time funding.
So the $22 billion is considered a one-time, right?
It's a mix of ongoing and one-time, but a lot of the deep investments are one-time money.
Judge Carter ordered homeless people in Skid Row to move to shelters. And I couldn't find any follow-up news on that. So I just don't know what happened after that.
Yeah, so that did get stayed. And so that directive is not currently in place. However, that has not at all impacted our efforts to try and bring people inside from Skid Row. And so the county has made these deep investments in trying to address homelessness for a number of years now. We have really scaled up our interim housing system. We have 50% more shelter beds than we had just a couple of years ago. We've helped over 75,000 people into permanent housing. We're doing focus efforts in Skid Row to bring people inside. And so all of those efforts are continuing. And they continued prior to the lawsuit, and they're going to continue after the lawsuit. Skid Row does play, is a central. It's basically our largest concentration of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County. And it's also an area where we have a lot of resources to serve people experiencing homelessness. But there's no question there are a large number of unsheltered people in Skid Row. There are a couple of thousand on any given night. It's a humanitarian crisis, and we need to not only continue our effort, but we need to greatly deepen our investment in Skid Row, and we need to be able to expand the type of housing that we've been talking about. You know, we need some new investments. We need to partner at the state and the federal level. We need to all come together with the city and county of Los Angeles to really like deepen the investments and do what we know works and create housing for people.
So have there been any conversations about, you know, it's so expensive to build housing in, you know, in LA. Why don't we spend the same amount of money and we can get 10x or 100x housing units in, you know, further away, not too much further, maybe 2 hours away. So have we had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness in LA, they were housed in Los Angeles before they became homeless. They may be homeless now, but they may have a community in Los Angeles. Their healthcare provider is in Los Angeles, or their mental health provider, you know, the places that they're connected to. And so most people are seeking to regain housing in the community where they're experiencing homelessness, because that is their community. And so I think, you know, our goal has been to try and serve people, you know, where they're at and connect them to the housing that's the best fit for them in the community where they want to live. And that's ultimately going to be the most successful way to help people move into housing and to stay stable in that housing. And I also, you know, we've had experiences, you know, reasonably with even within Los Angeles County, not even extending into another county, where, you know, there's a feeling that we need to serve our own homeless. You know, we need to take care of our own residents. We need to serve our own homeless. And the solution is not going to be to try and move them into a different jurisdiction.
I see. All right. Thank you so much. I think, you know, I feel like this is just really, really helpful to me and to Todd and to our team. And I'm just so grateful that you're taking the time to talk with me. And I really appreciate all you have done and your team have done for the homeless population.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great conversation. Thank you for all of those questions. They were really good.